Are you good to go? Yeah. Okay. So hi everybody. Welcome to the TST meeting. Today we have a couple of topics for discussion. One of them will be discussion about onos-loxi code, which will be led by Murat, and then after that we're gonna get an update from Viswa, Brian, and Jenkins about built-in package brigade work week that was happening this week. So with that, let me pass the.
Did you start notes, Utah? Or?
Yeah, I clicked on the comment section. Hold on.
Okay.
Okay. So I can project them here, or if you, do you want me to pass the sharing control to you?
So you want me to display this, or what do you mean?
Yeah, so we don't have any. So for Murat, you said you don't have any.
Yeah, I don't have. For OpenFlow stuff, we don't have anything to present. We just need to discuss about
Okay. So let's turn it over to discussion, and we'll figure out what.
Okay. So
any visual.
So a couple of months ago, before the ONS, so we just decided that we freeze the onos-loxygen, and we will use the loxygen at the upstream. So we will put the differences what we did, but to put all the differences that we did, so we have to also write there not only the Java, we also have to write the C code and the Python code and test it while I'm working on it. And so there is a lots of change requests that inside the onos-loxygen. We have two difficulties we have to figure out. One of them is to merge that are different differences from the onos-loxygen. And the second one is in the loxygen there is no MVN central, so there is no images deployed anywhere. There is no repository for the MVN. So that's we did in the onos-loxygen.
Yeah, yes.
So this is the big difference. So either we have to deploy that, so we have to figure out how we do it. We should continue, or this is I will start a thread to talk about even this should be handled by the loxygen team, or this should be handled by us. So this is there is two things we have to figure out. But while we are working on it, a couple of the projects, even the Utah and other, there's a VPN, another project, so they want to change a couple of things in the onos-loxygen. And one of them is also merged. That I saw that, so we didn't freeze yet. So. And then last week we said, okay, we should discuss in the TST what should we do. What we can do, we can just create another branch, so we can merge the latest loxygen there, which includes the OpenFlow 1.5 and the changes that we need. Then we can freeze and test our systems. Once we say that, okay, everything is working well, then we can push what are different. While we are doing that, we can also push our differences to the loxygen. But to do this, maybe we need another branch or another tag for the newest one, including the onos 1.5. So what is your suggestions? Or because there's a lot of change going on there in the loxygen, and there's lots of differences between onos-loxi and the mainstream. So we have to do lots of tests while we are doing, and also lots of the community also waiting for the OpenFlow 1.5, asking that when you deploy that, so maybe we can go in the two paths.
So I guess it's a question of how much pain the temporary thaw will cause, right?
Exactly. So
if temporarily thaw it, so we can make some changes on our own
system. So, but
people
are working on it. So what we can do, see that. So
yeah, I suppose. I mean, we don't have any other choice. I mean, if you want to continue.
Exactly. So we have to remove what we can do. We can change the numbers. And we can deploy the loxygen, newest loxygen, and test buoy mechanism. Everything is working there. So we can don't change anything in the onos, and but we can change the number and test whether the onos 1.0, 1.3, and 1.5 working very well. Then we can change also the version in the onos. But step by step we can go. But we can do it in 1 or 2 weeks, these kind of things. Once we talk about the changing the protocols in this, or especially the OpenFlow protocol, which is based on the ONOS, so we have to be very careful to change everything there.
So how close are we to getting our changes upstream to the main line?
Yeah, I just changed what we did for the C code, but I didn't push yet. But I know that for the OpenFlow, it took 1 or 2 months to push the OpenFlow 1.5 changes to the mainstream. We pushed that code, but it went. So they also request us to change the Python code and C code, everything. So this is a little bit pain, because once you change that, so you also have to test everything. So once you're testing, it will take more than, I expected more than 1 month, I can say. 2 months we can push the code. But while we are doing this, I don't want to freeze the other development case. And also, while we're looking, you also said there needs some changes in the oxygen also.
I mean, we constantly have a stream of like changes, support for DPA or support for some vendor extensions or support, for stuff, right? So I don't think this model of like freezing Loxi for some unknown period of time is a good one. Now, the question is like, okay, if we can take our forks changes and get them upstream, right? Including the Python, C, whatever, and then going forward, we tell people, if you want to use new experimenter methods and stuff, you have to go put them in upstream Loxi and we'll publish it for you or something, or they'll publish it when they publish it. I think that's an acceptable way to move forward. So the question is how close are we to getting the stuff that we have outstanding into upstream, and how long does it take on average for a patch to get accepted?
Yeah, this is also another maybe for us it's another problem, because the mainstream doesn't want to change these kind of experimental things. So, but we can easily change in our system. So if we have to do some experimental parameters, so I am not sure. Maybe we try to put upstream, then we may also change our decisions, because we couldn't change as we did in the onos-loxi here. So we can change and test the experimentals and we can return back. But if we talk about the mainstream, they asking why you are changing, and we couldn't say this is the experimental, so we want to change and remove. So I'm not sure. So because what we are doing especially maybe in the core projects on the fiber things, and so these kind of things, we are changing some experiment parameters. But I believe these parameters may not be going to the mainstream, because they're also working on it. They're also looking on the OpenFlow specs. They also only do the OpenFlow parameters. So this is also a little bit difficult for us to book down.
So what was the target goal, or what was the reason for starting this to begin with?
Yeah.
What's the need? Like, why do we need to use the upstream?
Originally was triggered by Ali that we don't want to maintain another fork of other projects, so we want to push all of the changes up to upstream, and once that's complete, we want to get rid of onos-loxi as a whole and just use their version.
I see. So I mean, yeah, in general, I think that's a good goal, but it sounds like it's not possible, right?
Yeah, because
it's taking too long to merge changes and they won't accept experimental features, right?
Exactly. So this is also getting some problems for us if you want to change something inside the OpenFlow and doing some enhancements. So yeah, the idea is starting very good idea. Then once we are working on it, these experimental parameters are the problem.
But is there at least a base that we could? So basically, so let's say we have to have some delta between us and upstream.
Yes.
Could we at least minimize the size of the base to make it easier to continue to rebase?
Exactly. That's we should do, at least because we are very far away from them. So
yeah.
At least we can merge, update. in fact, I have a couple of the packs, but it's 1 or 1.5 months old, so we have to check that again. So we have to change a couple of the parameters in our stream, so we can.
Yeah, but so there's two parts to this, right? First of all, making sure we bring ourselves on the latest of theirs, but I think there should also be a subset of changes we should be able to push, which have nothing to do with, let's say, the experimenters, right? I think there were some stuff that should be applicable to the upstream.
Exactly. We can do it. Yeah.
So, but we may just need to do it in a way where it doesn't require that the experimenters are part of the picture.
Yeah, we have to dig this code. I didn't check all the parts, but yeah, exactly. So these experimental parts, I'm not sure you know that these parts. So
I think most of it is experimental. So the patch is hanging. My patch is about fixing they're not following the open flow standard kind of thing. So that definitely should be upstream. But other than that, most of the stuff in our stuff is pretty much experimental of some sort. It can have experimental or so on. At least optical part, which means
yeah. But for the optical part, there is also another protocol also enhanced, right? So the open flow protocol. So what we change is at the 1.3. So now there is an enhancement for the optical. Is there any way we can use this one, or should we use the still experimental part? So maybe we can update our code based on the new specs. Or is it possible?
The new optical stuff is what added to open to 1.4 and later. 1.3 is still.
Okay.
As long as we want to talk to legal and so on, we still need to do that on our.
Okay, I got it. Well, in this case, I should check the code again. So what is the difference, or what we did is if everything, so if anything, I found instead of the experimentals, so we try to push this code to the upstream, and the second one is minimize the differences between the upstream and the onos-loxi. So we can, by doing this, we can have the onos OpenFlow 1.5 and the new enhancement and new fixes. I can say that. So, and we can push to your differences, because the youth also make the difference. Found some bugs in the oxygen, so this should be changed also in the mainstream. This
agreed, right?
Yeah.
So I guess the recommendations I'm hearing, right, is one, we'll maintain our fork for experimental features and for publishing. The second is let's try to regularly pull and merge the upstream. And the third is why are we in the business of changing OpenFlow?
OpenFlow is not experimental.
So it looks like Bob has a question. Why are we in the business of changing OpenFlow?
Yeah, I mean, I'd really like to suggest that we don't change OpenFlow and that we just use the actual spec. I don't think that it's ON.Lab's job to be in the business of changing OpenFlow in some unknown experimental way that nobody else has agreed on or thinks is useful.
Okay.
Well, I think the former is true, not the latter, right? But it's okay. That's a detail. Yeah, sorry, we get that.
Yeah. So how can we specify lambda in OpenFlow 1.3? That's the kind of thing.
So you shouldn't. You should be using OpenFlow 1.5, which actually supports it. I mean, why don't we use the actual standard?
What OpenFlow 1.5?
I don't know, whatever the latest and greatest is, I would suppose. I mean, the thing is, if it seems to me that if there's something wrong with Loxygen, if it doesn't allow you to add site local extensions to your Loxygen build. And so anything that's, I don't think you should change OpenFlow. Instead, anything that's not in OpenFlow should be in an extension, and Loxygen should have the ability to add extensions and perhaps site local extensions, right? And if it doesn't, then there's something seriously wrong with its design, because that means that anybody who wants to add support for an extension ends up having to maintain their own fork, which is a nightmare.
Well, if you could upstream that kind of plugin mechanism to Loxygen, it would be great to use that. That doesn't exist, so
So, but I think something in general is that you should never be changing OpenFlow, right? I mean, that's just a bad idea because OpenFlow is OpenFlow, and if it says it's OpenFlow 1.3, it shouldn't.
Simply riding on an open channel of the experimenter,
Yeah,
which is designed for experimentation.
Experimental messages, right?
So,
Oh, I see, but why? Okay, that seems like a bad idea. Why don't you build it as an extension instead? Because that can actually be consistent and can persist.
you're correct in a sense that if the Loxygen, the library itself, if we provide for ability to glue these extensions in some, basically code that can provide coverage for these extensions separately, that would be ideal. Some plugin.
Yeah, that really seems like a sensible design. I'm kind of shocked that it doesn't work that way, apparently.
It doesn't, unfortunately, right? So we need to look for a solution. So one solution would be to port everything to 1.5, which is not viable, not only from...
Why isn't that viable? It sounds like a good
we
idea.
can cover it, but then there's the devices that still don't support 1.5. They only support these experimental features. And so we still need to speak to them in OpenFlow 1.3 through these experimental features. So, which we don't
You know
have.
what? Yeah, I think that's maybe something that needs to be rethought. I think they should be extensions because extensions aren't experimental features. They can persist.
Fine, but
I think it doesn't make sense that, I mean, I don't know. I mean, it's maybe okay for a demo, but you can't think, I mean, I can't imagine shipping anything like that. It would be insane.
well, there's insane people in the world. So,
Well, I mean, I don't think you're going to get any traction with like, oh, we made our own custom version of OpenFlow, by the way. That's just not a winning idea. I mean, it's a terrible idea in so many ways because it basically creates fragmentation, and you end up with this particularly irritating problem where, so a device says it speaks OpenFlow 1.3, but it actually speaks some weird flavor of OpenFlow 1.3. So then you have to do device-specific programming.
can I suggest that Brian finishes going through the recommendations?
That was it.
That was it?
Maintain a fork for the
It's I was kind of trying to make a recommendation, which is that this whole idea is screwed, and you should really try to fix Loxygen.
Okay, well,
Can I take that you're volunteering to do that?
That's not a very appropriate thing to say to me. I mean, what I'm saying is that we should try to do the right thing, not necessarily the expedient thing. And I mean, it should be kind of obvious that this is really the wrong way to do it. And I'm not saying, oh, I have lots of free time, so I'm going to work full time on Onos now instead of Mininet. I mean, why would you possibly think that?
well, we don't have the right person, so we have,
But can we say that because with our changes at the differences, we can push this one to OpenFlow next specification? So we're just doing some proof of concept, so we don't deploy within these differences. So at least we are doing some proof of concept. If it works, maybe in the next OpenFlow version, 1.6 or another one, so we can push these differences.
I think there's something wrong with the way you're proceeding, right? I don't think you should call something OpenFlow 1.3 if it isn't. I mean, that's something that's driven me insane with, OpenFlow 1.0 and 1.1 is that devices say they're OpenFlow 1.1, but they really aren't. OVS being a major, OVS being an offender, it said it was 1.0, but didn't actually implement 1.0 correctly. It implemented pieces 1.0 and 1.2. That road leads to madness, so I don't recommend that we follow it.
so nobody's changing the protocol here. We're just simply talking about changing the code that allows us to do things that we need to be able to do to accomplish. And so while this may not be an optimal approach, I don't think that's something that we're debating. We're trying to figure out what is the most pragmatic approach. Since we don't have somebody to go and upstream an extension mechanism into Loxy, we need to.
That might very well be the long-term best result that reduces the amount of time you spend on it.
Fine, right. But right now we're just figuring out what do we do next. So our original plan of upstreaming everything clearly fell short because there is a resistance to be able to put extensions into the library. And
well, it seems like extensions should never be put in the library. I mean, putting extensions in the library is okay, but putting actual differences from the protocol is different. So I don't see any problem with putting extension in the library. I think that's okay.
That's what we're talking about, right? Vendor extensions?
Yeah.
I mean, putting vendor extensions into the library is a perfectly reasonable idea. Like, I think it should cover like the Nicira extensions and other things. Like, why don't they want to do that? That seems like, I mean, supporting extensions seems fine.
Exactly what we're talking
That's
about.
what we're talking about.
But I guess experimentals, I don't know. I guess I forget precisely about how OpenFlow 1.3 works, but I wouldn't change any of the OpenFlow 1.3 stuff. I would just put it in vendor extensions.
Right.
That's what we're talking about.
What we're discussing about.
So anyway, so for pragmatic purposes, then I think we're gonna have to continue maintaining our forks, pull and merge upstream, and then we're gonna have to.
I mean, I think we want to be good members of open source community.
Exactly.
So where there are bugs and other things.
Which is why I said we need to find the subset that the upstream will accept.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Yeah.
So I think we try on each of the patches to upstream them when it makes sense to do that.
exactly.
And
we have
then
to
there's some set of deltas that we maintain, and we need to fork if they're not going to publish, we need to fork to publish anyway.
Which means that the provisional process we have right now established for publishing, we probably need to make it a little more robust.
Well, you don't necessarily need to fork to publish. I mean, for example, you could just have a Travis job that just publishes the current release and bleeding edge of whatever Loxygen publishes.
Yeah, so what I mean by that is in order to publish, because we don't have rights to their group ID, we need to republish the artifacts under ONOS group ID, or we need to ask them for permission to publish. And if we're going to be publishing stuff that is not the upstream, then, well, I don't know how we get rights to their group ID. So, yeah. And yeah, you don't need a fork per se to do that. You could make the changes locally, and then you could publish them. But it'd be nice if someone were looking at the source code that was used to generate the actual release bits to have somewhere to point at.
Well, that's kind of. I mean, I sort of wonder about that as well. Like, I mean, there are other approaches that you could, for example. I mean, perhaps Loxygen is not as modular as it could be, but you could also. I mean, you could also just apply a patch to master. I mean, that's what a lot of projects do when they have to maintain forks. And I mean, there's sort of interesting things about that it sort of forces you to think very, very carefully about what you're actually changing, which is one feature I like about that. The disadvantage, of course, is that it's much more unwieldy than having an actual forked Git repo. But having a forked Git repo, like I said, it makes it so easy that you're tempted to dump a lot of crap in there that perhaps shouldn't be there. And in any case, somebody, I don't know who it was, Murat or Thomas, said you should make it so that you can always rebase against their master in any case.
And that's the goal, right? That's the part of the second bullet in the recommendation. All right. So is that it, guys?
Well, so I guess one challenge would be always rebase thing. If you're actually talking about a rebase, right, then you're going to be changing history. So people are going to need to do force reset hards in order to get their state of the world back in the proper state of the world, which I guess could be appropriate if you said to make changes you have to check out a clean copy, make your changes, and then this is like an unstable head or something like that. But whereas if you said, okay, we always have to be mergeable with the upstream, then you're going to have some merge commits, and your branch is going to look, your history is going to look a little different than the upstream, but you'll be able to do diffs against the upstream. And
so I guess I was not necessarily talking about the technical aspects of how to do it, but the point is that I guess I was looking at it from the principle, be able to minimize the size of the difference to the point where we can keep up with the latest head, however we do that, and to make it easier for us to not only maintain our own changes, but also if we do find fixes and stuff to be upstream in the future, it makes it easier for us to do without creating so much work like we have this time. That is the spirit of how we actually do it, whether it's to rebase what Git stuff. That to me, that's important, but secondary.
So, immediate stepwise, so we are pretty far behind that. We're using a code base where we're using Netty 3 or something, and
we change everything. So, in fact, we have the patches, but we have to update this one. But we changed the Netty by everything in also the southbound interfaces. So, but we test with them, and everything is working, even the 1.0 and 1.3 with the new one. So we have to update these ones also.
Relatively soon, we will probably need to publish our onos-loxi to pretty much relatively sync up to the upstream version, and also at the same time, we need to change the onos southbound side to bump the NETI version.
I think we already have 2 versions of NETI in use.
Right. So Loxi was using NETI 3, and they just upstream NETI started using NETI 4.
4, but I think our core uses 4, right?
The OpenFlow southbound uses NETI 3 to deal with Loxi.
We have to upgrade this one.
So we need to update southbound code when we update Loxi.
Yes. But I think that should be okay, right?
That should be okay.
This is also in the Garrett. We already changed this one and test with this one. So but we have to, with the newest one, we can test it. With the 1.0, everything is working for the 1.3 and the 1.5. So we can say, okay, we are now stable and we can.
Okay. So basically proceeding forward, I mean, once things are ready, after we've upstreamed it, then we're going to have to release our own bits. And also the same, not only for oxygen, but then have to go back and upgrade and merge the changes in the onos part of the tree to keep up with it. I see. Anyway, you were going to say something else. I tried to wrap up the discussion. You said something.
No, I wrote the recommendations down, right? It's
maybe just so that not so that we won't diverse. Whenever we accept new experimental or whatever, if it makes sense upstream, it requires them to also at least send a pull request when we send patch to our Garrett, then it might help merging in the future or something.
that pull request is when code is reviewed for. Yeah, because I think ultimately if the users that are making the changes are the ones upstreaming them, it's easier for them to defend and modify their changes. And like ultimately, if they go the route of sending the pull request and the pull request is rejected for some reason, then you accept it. Otherwise, you require that it goes upstream and then we pull it through down into our.
Yeah, right. So what's the expected, what do you think is the sort of expected timeline for finishing this exercise? I mean, it's not the question is not intended to imply time pressure, but simply curiosity.
In fact, we already did lots of things, but now then we are merging everything to our onos-loxi. Then we think about how to merge our differences to the upstream, so we can do the first one into our system. So I think first of all, I want to check out what is going on, what are the big differences now. So with Utah, we can check out, and next week we can discuss about the differences, what we do, which part we can merge, and okay, we can test already. Because we just merged this one and we already tested lots of the parts, and I don't expect too much time to merge these ones into.
Also, it's something that you think would be able to be accomplished by K release?
I think so. I hope so. Yeah, we can do it.
I mean,
hopefully.
One possibility, right, is you take another branch in onos-loxi. You make that master, right? And then you take the existing one and you slowly try to push changes up that can be and pull those down continuously into the master.
Yes.
And then when the changes get rejected, you just cherry pick them over to the new branch, and then whenever that's done and ready, we publish a new version and move forward.
Exactly. We can. We should.
And if people need to make existing changes until that switchover point, they can continue to make changes on top, and then they should cherry pick them over to the new branch if they can't be upstream.
Yeah. Maybe we should also take some timeline to check what is the difference between R and upstream, and maybe every month at the end of is there any big differences between us, or we can
Yeah, and that would be part of the sort of the second bullet, is to set up some sort of a process, right? Is to keep an eye on it. All right, cool. Any other questions or additions on the subject?
Yeah, this is kind of frustrating. I don't think it's the right way to proceed.
So I mean, I hear you, Bob, but so I think your concern is something that we probably ought to strive to change in the long term. But I think for short term, that's not something that we can afford, right? We need to be able to catch up and at least push some of the fixes upstream. And while it's not optimal to maintain this as a long-term process, it's something that we may need to do out of necessity, at least in midterm. And as Yuta sort of alluded to it, I mean, we're looking clearly, if somebody has some good idea and time to improve that process, but both from our side as well as from Loxi's side, great, let's work on that. But we can't just say that this sucks and can't do anything, right? So we need to move forward.
Yeah, I mean, I was suggesting that, you think about doing this in the long term because it's going to save you time in the long term. That's the thing. And, in the long run, you'll end up much better off than you would otherwise. And it's not just for Onos and Cord, but actually the entire user community would benefit from it. So that's why I think you should really think about trying to do things the right way. And, and I'm fine with saying, okay, we're going to stage it. So first make sure that we can rebase with their tip of their master, right? Net or the last release version. Then submit all the changes for OpenFlow 1.4 and 1.5 support upstream and try to get them in, but I think the goal ultimately should be for this to work in such a way that we don't have to maintain a fork, and so that everybody who wants to add a vendor extension doesn't have to fork Loxygen, because that just sounds like a nightmare.
And I hear you. Yep. Okay, are you ready to move on to the next subject then? Okay, well, thank you. Thanks, Murat. Thanks, Yuta. I think with that, we can probably pass the buck to Viswa. There we go.
Share something? Or you can share the notes. Sure, you can share. What's the what? Sorry?
Okay, I'll make you the presenter.
Oh, please and move on. Okay, so this is Viswa and myself and Venkat are coming in.
Hold on one second, guys, just for these people. Make sure you raise your voices. Sometimes remote people are not hearing.
Okay, am I audible? Okay, yes means no. Okay, so as part of build and package infrastructure brigade, we are just having a three-day work week, which is concluding today. And Rain was kind enough to walk us through the different parts of Onos build and package stuff. So I'll just go over the notes that we took for 3 days, just for the community to know what we went through. So we had a series of sessions on Buck, like the history of Maven and why Onos moved to Buck, and what are the gaps that we currently have, and we have also identified some tasks, some work items for K release to actually address the gaps that we have with current Buck build system. And so, of which one of the important tasks here is to obsolete form files. So as part of this, we are just trying to address some gaps in the current build system, of which one is to, I think it will be here. Yeah. First step is to make all modules build using Buck, for which there are 4 action items here. One is to add support for legacy Yang rule plugin and to add support for thrift and protbuff. I just had interaction with Aaron. He said he's already having hacks, so probably I'll take his script and then try to extend it. And then is to add support for embedded dependency. So we believe these are the only gaps that we have currently, at least that we know, and probably we reach out to community to know if there are any other gaps. If so, we'll address them on the run. And once this is done, then probably we'll also work to actually port what to say, like currently Bug actually provides IDE support for IntelliJ, but it doesn't support Eclipse. So the idea is to either make that happen or just provide a translator from onos-IML files to Eclipse files so that Eclipse developers can take a look at it. And then the idea is to obsolete all POM files except for 4 main ones, and so that at the end of scale release, we hope that entire owners can build just using Buck. So that's on the Buck, and then we also had a good round of discussion on code disaggregation, the reason why we want to move and what are the pros and cons of code disaggregation. As part of that, we want to try our hands with the repo functionality. So the idea is to come up with a very trivial manifest file, taking Onos app samples as a hello world project, and try and build along with Onos and Onos app samples. So once that is done, we'll know how to deal with it. We will probably extend the scope to disaggregate other parts of Onos code base. So, but before that, we'll be having another TST meeting to actually debate on the workspace, like what repo should be part of what workspace, and what is the process that we are going to do, that we are going to take as part of disaggregation, the gating process, the review process, and all stuff will come after we just have this hello world implemented. And next, we also discussed on the documentation aspect. So today, even though we have wiki, the wiki is not up to date, and then I mean, a lot of people are finding difficulty in actually navigating around the wiki to find the information that they want. And one of the idea from Ali was to actually take a look at Gitbook to see if we could actually document the release specific information as part of every release, so that gets checked in as part of code, so that we can version it and archive it. But then during the discussion, there was a point that like not all users might be Git aware, so there can be some naive users who just want to just go to the wiki and document some stuff. So they might not be comfortable in actually going through the Git SCM process to do a check-in or to make some documentation changes. So the action item here is to reach out to community to understand what are the different categories of developers that we have currently, like or users of the documentation that we have currently, and then depending upon that categorization, we could probably choose right technology for right category of users. So as first step, we want to reach out to the teaching brigade, who is actually tackling a related problem of like this stuff, and then probably get a feel of the category of users, and then we'll proceed from there. And the next item that we discussed is on the Jenkins. So today we have a set of freestyle Jenkins jobs, which are more like a primitive, and then the idea is to move from freestyle Jenkins job to a pipeline-based job, so that even the CI part of stuff can be checked in, versioned, and we can do a lot of stuff. So Ray has already got proof of concept for nightly builds, or yeah. So but for some reason it's not working. So the one of the action items here is to get a script and try to understand what is missing, extend that script so that we just do a nightly build as part of the Jenkins process. So once that is done, integrate that Jenkins job to do the get it patched validation, so that if tomorrow someone tries to upload a patch, it will take the Jenkins path to do the verification build. So once that is done, then probably we could attach the TC part of it, so that we can even try to have a release build made out of Jenkins at the end. So that's on the Jenkins one, and then we had a good amount of discussion on the release process, like how currently Onos release builds are being made, the release scripts and other development scripts that they have currently. So, and 4 action items were decided as part of that discussion. One is to document the current release process and inventory what we build, and probably document it somewhere, either in Wiki or Gitbook, so that people can people can be aware of how ONOS is getting built on the release time. And then once that is done, then probably we need to see, like, we will have to build the entire artifacts. Like today as part of release build, we are actually producing the target gset and then Maven artifacts, Sonar type repository, and then Docker images. But then we don't know if everything is getting consumed. So the idea is to again try and see which is necessary, which is not necessary, or which can be built on demand, so that we could actually do this process in much more optimized way. And then at the end, like, instead of doing a release build manually, the idea is to move that to Jenkins, so that instead of release build getting done in a laptop, it will be done in some build servers in much more organized way. And then we also had to talk with respect to the versioning. So today today ONOS core API doesn't follow semantic versioning. So the idea is to bring that up, and then assuming that we are moving to a code disaggregated world, so that every repo is having its own roadmap and then its own way of control. So how are you going to manage the versioning with respect to different separate Git repos? So that is also a question there. And then we had a discussion regarding next-gen build tools and then archetypes. I think these are all something like nice to have kind of discussion, but it's not necessarily tagged to release. So of all these items, only the POM obsolescence activity is actually tagged to a K release. And then we agreed upon some of the action items on governance perspective, like the sync up call. I mean, we want to have a weekly sync up call, and then we just had a crash course on how to use Jira and what are all the sprint cycles there, and how to scope a story under a Jira sprint and all those stuff. So that was a quick recap for what we did in the last 3 days.
Great. Any questions?
Any questions?
Are we really working in Viswa, Viswa or onos?
Pretty similar to Buck, maybe cheaper in the long
Yeah.
game. We'll see.
So yeah, I have a couple comments. I mean, one, this looks great. This is like a lot of stuff that we've been needing for a long time. So I think it's really awesome. Regarding Basil, it may seem like a terrible idea to move to a different build system, but like I said, I think we should, like I said before, I think we should look at the long term, what's going to save us time and what's going to produce the best result. And obviously, we don't want to waste too much time, on the build system rather than doing actual work. But I think build system improvements are leveraged and are multiplicative across every single developer, every time you build ONOS. So I think it's worth getting it right. And I think, we should really be willing to put effort into, doing that, because it'll pay off massively, not just for us, but every single ONOS developer for the core and every app developer externally as well.
The other thing, you say you're probably the only one in this room that could take advantage of it, but we were looking at that for sort of setting up workspaces where you can have multiple repos and plugins and stuff that get defined for a particular project workspace.
Yeah. So today ODL has it.
Yeah, that sounds nice. I mean, I don't use Eclipse, but it has definitely been extremely painful to try to, set up building ONOS just in IntelliJ, which is supposed to work. Like, it doesn't work. The Buck plugin doesn't work. It doesn't build. When it does build, it's got a lot of kind of awful problems. So solving the IDE issue is, once again, I think something that's leveraged and will help everybody internally. Like, it was really shocking to me when I found out, apparently, by asking everybody in the lab, like, how do you build ONOS in IntelliJ? And the answer is nobody actually does. And about documentation, I have mixed feelings about this, but I think something like, some kind of hardwired format like Gitbook is really good when you have a sort of large paid staff of technical writers. So I hope we can get that staff to write it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the larger discussion here, right, is, whether Gitbooks is the right format or not is one question. So what's the right technology? The other question is sort of for different types of documentation, what is the right medium and right storage location for that? And I think something that we've been talking about for a while is that the storage location for technical documentation or system documentation in the code base might be better than the wiki because it's versioned alongside the code. It can be reviewed alongside the code at the time of code review, and it can be easier for someone to release that documentation with the code. So
I would argue that you've argued against that yourself by saying you want to disaggregate the repo. I think what you're saying is that it should be versioned and the versioning should be easy, and it should be easy to build the right version of the documentation that corresponds to a particular version of the code and to like synchronize those. But I think you've argued that like bloating the repo by adding in, now it's going to have a huge documentation repo in it somewhere. That seems counter to your argument for disaggregating repositories.
So I don't think I've ever really argued for disaggregating the repo from a bloating perspective. I mean, I think if we wanted to go my personal perspective, I think there's a lot of advantages to large repos. But I think the reason why we're talking about, well, some people want to talk about it from a deep loading perspective. That's not the argument I'm making. I think the argument that I would say is that from an ownership perspective, having disaggregated repos can make sense. That can partially be solved using module owners, but also from a maturity perspective. So for example, a new application is going to be developed. If that application gets developed in the main repo and is checked into the regular build process, it's going to be held to sort of standards for testing and stuff for which it may not be ready. But at some point, the project goes from incubating to mature. At that point, it would need to adhere with the standards for code style, testing, et cetera. And then at some point, these projects may be end of life. And if they're end of life in the main repo, they kind of need to be deleted, right? There's no way to sort of symbolically link in these projects if everything's in a mono repo, unless you're willing to delete the code and then to bring it back is, a complicated revert which may not merge properly. So from a project life cycle perspective, the multi-repo scenario affords us some benefits, but it does introduce technical issues. And I mean, I don't know, the bloating of a repo is not necessarily a concern of mine. It may be for other people, but documentation being close to the source code, whichever repos that lives in, I think still makes sense. I'm not arguing that we have for the sort of a documentation on a specific app, its internals, how it works, its design. I think that should be co-located with the source. So I'm not saying that would go in a different repo. Now, if you have other documentation for ONOS deployments, user guides, system admin guides, that type of stuff, yeah, maybe that exists elsewhere and would kind of go with release versions. But I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, my thought, I'm not sure if I'm echoing what you're saying, Brian, but if you look at, documentation that's put in like the Linux kernel repo, usually it's sort of, readmes about sort of, architecture and system design and what a module does and how it's implemented. And that seems to make a lot of sense to like be part of the code. But then if you look at other documentation, like, well, actually, I mean, it's interesting. I'm not sure if the kernel man pages, for example, are part of the kernel repo. Actually, I think they're part of the a separate kernel man pages repo. And there's sort of a good reason for that. And that is that every time you change one typo in a piece of documentation, it sort of revs the repo in some sense, if it's bound tightly to the repo. And so, like you say, but if I suppose the core kernel developers were the ones who are writing the documentation, then it might make sense to have the kernel man pages, for example, as part of the kernel repo. And actually, maybe they are. I'm not sure. But then you look at other kernel documentation, of which there are a whole lot of examples. It's all separate, but it's documented, but it's still versioned. It's bound to a specific version of the kernel. Like, oh, this is Linux 2 documentation, or this is Linux 3, this is Linux 4 documentation. So I mean, there is versioning, but it's not tightly bound. And so you'd say, well, why is this? And well, it's because Git is usually a pretty crappy way to do writing, unless you have a good front end to it, like what is it, the online tech system? I forget what it's called, but
Overleaf?
Overleaf, yeah. So that's an example that, I mean, I guess it's Git backed, is that correct? But, or maybe it's not, I'm not sure. I mean, the whole point is that who knows what it's backed with, but it's perhaps backed with some versioning system, but it has a really nice sort of front end. And another issue with sort of kind of user-facing documentation, actually even architecture documentation, is that it tends to have a lot of diagrams in it. And those are really kind of anathema to Git, you know, like I've had repos where you keep having to check in a new EPS F into Git, and it's a total nightmare, and it bloats the repo, and you know, it's the idea of diffs on an EPS are not particularly meaningful, or PDF for that matter. But whenever you have to start like checking diagrams into the repo, Git sort of becomes a bad tool. Now I know that you can't actually do that with Git-backed wikis and stuff, but it's not really what Git was designed for, and it creates a lot of kind of problems in terms of repo bloat. I guess you can talk about this more later, but I guess I was trying to say that, you know, for me at least, the bloat is a concern, and it's also might not make sense if it's different work groups working on it. It might run into that problem where basically two people are slowing each other down by having to share the same repo. But like you said, I mean, having some documentation co-located with the code makes a lot of sense, especially if the people who are writing the code are writing that documentation.
All right. So that's actually, the third bullet is to determine what parts of documentation should be where. You know, do they go in the same repo as the source code? Do they go in the wiki? Do they go in a different thing? And what are the tools that each of those types of documentation should be using?
And at the end of the day, I don't think the tools matter too much. I think it's the main reason why the ONOS documentation is so terrible is that we don't have a dedicated staff of people writing it.
I don't know if we'll ever get that, but
Yeah, and that may be something that sort of impedes ONOS's success.
Okay, thanks, Viswa.
Thank you.
Good discussion. Right. Unless anybody else, anything else, we're at the top of the hour, so we can probably call it a day or a week, whatever we want to do. And see you next week. Thanks, everybody.